And Corey,
Okay.
okay. Just give us a little bit of sense of your firm, what kind of dealership coming after, size and scope, and just as an introduction.
Appreciate it. My fund is called Meridian. We're slightly different than most funds in that it's an merchant banking model. So I invest in 4 machine learning infrastructure companies a year, and then work at those companies over a 2-year period to scale them into sovereign markets, to sell in the foreign governments, for U.S. markets, or to SCPs, and also do direct sales.
Hi everyone, I'm Lainy Painter-Singh and partner at Craft Ventures, and we invest from seed all the way through late stage. This fund chapters around 2 or 3 million, all the way up to about 40.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for staying cool. Try to keep it spicy or useful on this last panel. So I think guys are request if any of us become for posts or there's too much stuff in, you don't have any fucking idea what we're saying, just give us like some sort of My name is Chris Brown and I'm a partner at Inspired Capital. I studied that data. Some other firms who were at the stage have equity public part of it in the early stage. I'm sure we've raised.
So founders are told, don't stop raising. Just you finish this raise, keep raising, and you're always in the market and all that sort of stuff. But at some point, they have to keep running the company and make time for other stuff. So I'm curious if you guys have a specific example of, or maybe it's sort of an amalgamation of what you've seen founders that do well. Founders who stayed in touch because, people say to do that, but I'm actually curious about the tactics, like coffee meetups, emails, what are ways in which people have built and maintained a relationship with you ahead of raising that you thought was time efficient?
Yeah. So I spent last week in San Francisco. I think that the West Coast is way better than the East Coast. There are some characteristics of the Bay Area that make me think a lot of people there just need to go touch some grass. But there's some characteristics of it that lend themselves really well to the answer to this question, which is there's probably a work-life integration that lends itself really helpful. Interactions that would feel out of place in New York. I mean, can you imagine being in Greenwich Village and somebody being you want to go for a shake tomorrow? On Saturday, you're gonna be no, that is such a state that's so much the East Coast perspective. And so I think it depends on where you are. And in general, I kind of think it's our job to stay in touch as opposed to yours. And we kind of use it as a proxy for interest. If somebody is interested in trying to stay in touch with you, it will generally be with a parents. So I suppose my data, I don't really think that it's on people building companies that really send much.
I'm a big fan of the async email, and if you send an email every quarter and say revenue's up 50% this quarter, revenue's up 50% this quarter, you're going to get a lot of replies from DCs that you've already connected with, so we'll be to reconnect with you.
15% of great point. That's the problem.
And then I was also really cautioned against spending a lot of time connecting with VCs. If you've met me once or 6 times, ultimately the characteristics of the business are going to drive whether or not we underwrite an investment. And there's massive diminishing returns to you continuing to invest your time with any given VC. And so in general, I would actually think it's a pretty poor use of founder time to keep people extremely updated with things like coffee chat.
I have a slightly different take, mainly because of where the market is for machine learning infrastructure, where the narrative changes the valuation substantially and as competition in rounds. So one of the things that I think is helpful is if you're going to go raise in 6 months, you should try to then integrate your social circle with the person that you are going to be raising from. You should have a lot of friends. You should have an indirect campaign of influence in which you ask the people around that you're mutuals with to regularly mention you. It's something that I think if you are constantly in a conversation people that respect each other and you've orchestrated that, you've put yourself in a position to be looked at very seriously when it's time. And so everyone's going to be marked on the merits when they raise, but the valuation in which you raise on is based on the momentum that you've created a lot of the time prior to the raise. And that's one of the ways that I think you can do it. But again, like for GMV-based businesses, that's very different. For machine learning infrastructure, momentum matters a lot. Evaluation, strategies.
So I don't disagree with you, but I know there are some people here who heard that who was like, oh my God, that sounds so mindful. Like that sounds so like, but I'm sure it works. And the maybe like lighter version of that, I would say, and when I say like the opposite of that is, there are definitely founders who are not in the flow, who are outside the ecosystem. And the things that I look at them a little bit is there is an ecosystem and a water cooler of people who are innovating the most. And I'd say like, you need to know what they're talking about. They need to know you. And if you don't get to your disadvantage to not know sort of like what's going on in the market and be a part of that flow. And so not even just being like, can you mention me, right? But there's an ecosystem of founders around the fund this year, and I think you want to be talking to those VC you want to pitch. And so it works both ways, right? You want to be getting information and all of that sort of stuff. Not just a whisper campaign, but also getting.
Yeah, I agree with what's behind it. The point I think. The point is, in multiple years of your life on this and you're all in, then if you can do anything to get an extra mile closer for your goal of fundraising, that's ethically okay, which means like, are you going to integrate social circles if you can? Can you get a drink with the person that you might want to get funded in a larger group? Like those are the things that I think are important. And I think it's core to raising, to be honest.
One framing is like, it's not really a single thing. It's a multiplayer game, which is incredibly counterintuitive. Like, how can the most important thing that's ever happened in someone's career, like, be dependent upon other players in the ecosystem? But it very much.
John, let's say what you're going to say. Founders, a lot of times they have an idea of like how much money they might want, but at the same time, it's like a little dependent. So for example, you might have thinking like, $10 million would be a really nice round. But if a VC came back and said, like, if you use 15, I'm sure you can figure out a way to put the other 5. At the same time, you don't want to answer yes to the 10 if really 7 is all we're marking with there. And so, how should someone feel about like testing that iteratively to understand like what the market would bear?
I would say that usually the market will bear what we can reasonably explain for your growth trajectory. Of like, I need 24 months of full speed and it's going to cost me this. And beyond that, it's diminishing return substantially. If you're at the Series A collection point and your traction supports that, then there's no reason that you can't honestly pitch that.
All of that. Very these days, I love the software component. So whether it's the Kindle or Remarkable, somebody needs to build better software. I know you guys are all working on doing like Lainy. So if you don't have a deep network of investors, maybe you come from a particular industry, so sort of how do you say that founders should go about like sourcing those new relationships?
Yeah, I think that comes back to the multi-threaded approach, which is there's so much value in having a founder community, people like this, people that are in the same space as you're in, and people that might be a little bit ahead of you. Getting an email from another founder out, existing portfolio founder is super valuable. It's much more valuable. Are always going to take those meetings. And if they're relevant to you, they also, those are really mutually beneficial relationships for you way outside of fundraising, like random pitfalls to avoid that you can really only get from that sort of community. So from the earliest days, I think those relationships pay massive, massive dividends. And head to your plan that, San Francisco doing this pretty well, to kind of being in that zeitgeist is useful for many reasons. One of the fundraising introductions, hopefully way more than just that transactional element of communities for its,
Let's take me for a moment. How do I know if my funnel is even big enough? How do I know if I have enough names? And do you have like a recommended amount of, if you're gonna build out a Series A funnel, how many relevant funds should it include?
I actually do this for portfolio companies. So I can tell you, I normally start with like 50 to 70 firms and then tier them. And I want you to talk to 10 to start with. And then we're going to add more to the funnel. I want 7 live conversations at all times. You haven't heard back in 24 to 48 hours. It's a no. Keep on moving. Refill that funnel. Keep on going down the list. We're going to start with how you find out most relevant down the fairway folks. There's really no point in trying to like wait until the end of the process to like pitch the right people, but just be prepped and ready to go for those initial conversations that this is your highest days. People like have your pitch down and ready to go, your storytelling, your data, or everything else you need before you go into that. And then it's a CRM, a sales funnel. Be relentless. Get through it as quickly as possible. Speed will kill you through in the minimum number of days possible, all the way through the funnel. And that's why you keep on doing this 3 weeks. And you're like, oh my gosh, there's no one here. We're going to start again. That's a very mathematical reveals.
Chris, I can ask that to you, but I wasn't prepared for ladies to bridge the guy. So, do you have anything to add?
I have no notes now. I just hope that I'm always in Lainey's first batch of introductions.
We were always on the spreadsheet. I can go pull it up.
It is interesting though, if you haven't heard from somebody within 24 hours, like not been in the know, and Chris will just follow up there. Like, obviously you're busy, you have a lot of things going on. Like, do you think that it is true that the deals you wound up doing at that time in your firm, like there's a much quicker response, and it's like literally at 24 to 48 hours to determine whether or not you have the yeses and nos?
General point of view is that I think you should always be probabilistic. Companies probabilistically likely you should succeed or fail. Probabilistically, yes, that is true, although it's not binary. The only other thing I would say about Lainey's response to it, I was thinking about that. My job in my head is effective to make sure that all of you don't enter that. Like, I want to meet you before that thing starts. That's hard to do because it usually means that the price will be lower, which is like against the interest of founders and for the fund. But in theory, like it also means that there's like a lot of brain damage that doesn't need to happen. So what you will find as you go to raise a seed, A, B, growth round, whatever it is, you will find people who are attempting to kind of circumvent what Lainy described. My point of view there would be like approach with caution, because some of this is extremely legitimate. There are people who have done the work, thesis oriented, are going to pitch it back to you. Those can be great. You can get, a fundraising process done in a week, and you can go back and spend like a quarter of the year focusing on your business and your product instead of the fundraising process. But everybody is trying to do that now, and everybody will say things to preserve the option out. And so I think it's not like if this, then that. Like everyone has the right path at this point. It is often an investor interest to run the market process as much as I run.
So even if everybody's trying to segment the process, what's a piece of information either in the data room or the pitch that somebody basically like always needs to be ready to show and have updated at all times that sort of comes up that founders may not always have at the ready? So
I've been looking at those for like 15 years at this point. And the one rule is that there are no rules. This is like a concert. It's like it's a curriculum major in advertising creativity. And so like here are a couple of the things that I think are not traditional that have been really effective. At one point, there was a company we looked at that had a one-pager in their sends data room that said why you shouldn't invest. And it was like 5 extremely specific risk factors around the product. And it was like so refreshing. And it sparked a lot of conversation and we invested. Another is just like video interviews of customers. It's exceptional, like very rarely seen. Or just like, if not video, just like customer testimonials the whole way through. The other thing that I get critiqued on a lot, but until the day I retire, like no such thing as being too early to have an operating or financial model. And I know that there's probably adverse reactions to that. They get ripped apart on Twitter all the time for saying that. But I don't mean literally like a but I demonstrate to folks that in advance of spending time and energy of your career, there's actually kind of some thought that went through. So like, this is what it could look like if it went in this direction. If it's a marketplace business, this is what the contribution margin could look like. This is another like 95% of pre-Series A raises do not have one. You're automatically operating in the top kind of like 1 to 5% of pitches. If you have that, there's no such thing as business being too early to be mathematically modeled out as if it were large. Right. So whenever we hear that folks are super against that, we either conclude that like they don't know the answer to it, which means insufficient thought, which means like why are they going to ask for money, or it's a skill, which is like just as bad. So that would be my case.
Secretly a relevant mind. I'm sure they appreciate it. And then, you know, to have for that. You have anything to add? What kinds of information do you want to see if there's no always for it?
Yeah, I think my answer is very aligned with what I was initially saying, which is a lot of the ways as narrative control, right? Your business is where your business is having you raise. Your methods are where they are. But one of the things that's important is if someone says, okay, you have non-recurring revenue, you have a portion of your revenue is non-recurring. Someone's going to look at that and they're going to make a judgment about it. And if you don't influence that judgment before they learn about your non-recurring revenue, they're going to have their first take as the starting point for where they look at that information. And, oh, it's non-recurring, I don't like it, it's whatever the narrative. There's information that could go one of two ways. You could say it's non-recurring because we actually really like this customer and we decided to give them a break on their first one to get them in the door. They've been super successful. And here's a letter from them saying that, you know, whenever we decide to switch to recurring, they're going to be there for us. Controlling the narrative at moments of inflection through memos is very, very important. First, to present that information at the moment of inflection for a piece of data. So targeted half-page memo, hey, why our non-recurring revenue is our vote. Get that positive narrative first. Otherwise, you risk someone having their own narrative, which then can go in a direction that we can't control, which can have someone lead to a.
There's a really great article that was written about somebody who was like being head of security to celebs and other folks. They had really turned their life around, but had previously been incarcerated. And so they led a little bit of a rough and tumble lifestyle. They got like tons of tattoos and all of this sort of stuff. And one of the things that they always did was send their bio ahead of a meeting that describes all of their accomplishments in this industry to position it like, when you meet me, you're now learning what a head of security that has built this kind of business and works with celebs looks like, versus the moment I walk in the door, you make assumptions about what I look like, and then I have to then retell you the narrative that you've already decided in your head. So I really like that. So,
I'll just add one more like specific example out of recency bias, because it was a conversation that happened last week around control. Meta business doing $1 million-ish in ARR. It's a software product, and it distributed to the market in two ways. One was a very traditional kind of web-based distribution of the products of our customers. The other one was like a web growth. Depending on whether we look at those things in cohorts or like this, the gross retention for the business is somewhere like 96 or 80%. Right. So what's happening is like PLG companies are coming in and using it quickly, sharing a lot, but like the enterprise sales were realistically. And so if you leave that to the discretion of the viewer, they're going to draw their own conclusions. And they're probably going to make the argument that your gross retention is 80 and that you should be raising at X. But if you own that narrative, and by the way, infinitely possible these days, there are many companies that are purportedly at 100 million ARR with negative gross margin. So going back to the no rules thing and narrative consulting, and like it is the tail of the tape for men. And I don't, it's equally grace as a brokerage. That business ended up successful fundraising based on an argument that the PLG was just an effort to kind of drive data through the product flywheel, and that the actual business you can fail that based on that sale over time. And that kind of.
So Lainy, I'll ask you this question, and I'll jump around for one more. How many founders, that was your, like, maybe hearing about you and your firm for the first time? Just the best way for somebody to due diligence you?
There's a ton of information on Twitter, on LinkedIn, our website. In general, I find VCs like very much want to be found, or like real estate agents, like a picture around side benches. So you can generally figure out pretty quickly with a quick query of the ChatGPT what sort of investments I've made over the last 2 years. I would kind of start there, and then both think that, you know, remember be investigating into is relevant. My sort of hot take on this would be like, I don't worry so much about competitive investments. I generally think showing that someone's interested in your space and that sort of business model is pretty interesting. Is a pretty good sign that someone might be fit. If you think something is like purely directly one-to-one, you are competing with him today directly, you see them deals. Of course, that's a little bit different, but like in some point in 10 years, if a widely successful, and we might be competing against each other, I would say that's a right framework to use to work about that.
So Chris, you had a focus that I didn't know about in some like had chat robotics types of stuff. And I'm curious how when people are building their funnels, just going after people who have a specific sector of expertise, which you might know all the reasons why you shouldn't go into that sector. So you might be harder, right? Versus somebody who's a more generalist who, I might have to explain some things, but the questions might not be as hard. Do you have a view of like who you should be going after for your funnel?
I have a perspective. I mean, you and I have the same alma mater at First Gen, and that has informed this perspective dramatically. I like generalists early and specialists increasingly as user persuades. There are just some incredibly specific characteristics of the category that I spend the most time in, which is kind of like hardware-enabled software, physical AI, and robotics. As you get later and later, there are like extremely specific depth relationships and components of kind of like supply chains that are quite esoteric. And like, I don't think it's reasonable to expect most VCs, especially if they're taking a board seat, to have a firm perspective on that. But early, while those things are like still somewhat relevant, it is more fun than building the company. So I like that evident thing is generalist firm with a specialist oriented partner, like graduating to specialist firms over time.
John, we could ask you a little bit different question. When you started off, you said, hey, we have kind of a slightly different model. This is your way to work with companies. In the venture space, people run into a lot of venture and venture-like entities that for differentiation purposes or fraud purposes, like to say their model is different than special. Some of them sound interesting. Some of them are not a good fit. This sort of understands the viability, legitimacy of like sources of funding that like feel a little different than your average straight and narrow VC.
You just have to talk to someone else. There's not a lot of other ways. People can say whatever they can say. The founders rarely lie to each other. This and this, the other people getting at. So when I get to a point in a relationship with some biz John, never heard of your merchant bank fund, and I don't know what that is. I like you. We have a couple of mutual friends that refer to in. It's been a good relationship. Are you actually real? The answer would be the last 3 people I invested in, they're their cell phone numbers, and you should chat with them. Because at the end of the day, the referral is really all that matters. A lot of funds can have, their disclosures, but at the end of the day, 70% of that can be for follow-on, and they say maybe Series A, but really they're just building relationships between Series B and C's. No matter who it is, no matter the fund structure, no matter what anyone says, you should speak to other founders about the person that you're going to have with. It's just be on the board, or them in the server, and then be with you for a long time. And you need to know the person about it.
And I think it's a green flag of you're willing to be forthright about like, these are the people I work with and you can attend. Yeah, for sure. Okay, one quick answer for each. Recurring risk that you see in Series A pitches that if people don't have time should probably address. Yeah, well, just something that like somebody hasn't figured out yet that you're just like, you know what, if you could figure out this one thing, that would increase your chance of being able to raise a Series A.
It's very rarely the same thing every single time. Things that are challenging end up being gross margins and being risk around if the go-to-market is repeatable, is it still all founder-led sales and manage to hire what would that look like?
Lean is very tough, so because he's only good medium, they're going to have to have their answer.
We're trying to do one that's not predictable. I think the number one reason for pass for Series A is the primary pitch is a common narrative. And so, did you know that the U.S. is a silver tsunami? You know that supply chains need to be onshore for greater confidence. Those things are not the pitch. Those are the tailwinds that support the pitch. And there often needs to be another sentence that educates the room, that the rest of the world or just won't know for the new. I think the lack of that, yeah, is, or even honestly just like observation. That need to be, I think insight implies that it's derived from your own experiences in the other people's experiences. But like the lack of that is probably the single largest reason for past.
I think one of the issues is the lack of urgency that's driven by a lack of structure and processes. So letting everyone into your data room at the same time, say, hey, noon, October 24th, you're going to be in access. We have ready for 3 conversations. That forces people's hands to go towards a term sheet faster and not try out the process. If you don't have that kind of structure, you can end up with people not making a decision or taking too long and burning up your runway. So make sure you have structure that forces a decision.
One way that I often advise founders to address that is because you want to create a funnel, but you don't want to say things like, we're going to raise by November 1st, because what you can't control that. And what if you did? Now you're out there, twisting in the wind. You might not be able to say that you're going to be done raising by November 1st, but I can be done with. So I think it's entirely reasonable to go to AC and say, we're kicking off this raise. We're going out to a select group. I think it's reasonable to get a directional indication of whether or not we're going to be interested in a 3-week period, or would you pick something up this time? Like, do you think that assuming I'm timely and answering all my questions and being, you have the data room together and all this sort of stuff, that I can get an indication from you whether or not you want to go to the next level in this process, whatever, within 3 weeks. And the person might say, actually, we'd have a new meeting, blah, 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 whatever, 4 works better for us. Okay, fine. And at the end of 3 weeks, you can stop talking to that person. That doesn't mean you're done with the raise, you're just done with them. And then you can sort of move on from there. If somebody ever asked me that, to be honest, I actually found it hard to organize myself as a VC. So if somebody said, this is a deal that's going to go away for you at this point, well, then I'm going to organize myself to come to an answer at that night, because it's kind of a squeaky wheel. So,
The reverse goes.
The reverse goes. Yeah. I'm doing it for you after this. Cool. I think you have time for
Thank you guys. This was a great panel. We're trying to critique for a question. Kind of answered it, so maybe it's done. But so confidentiality in investor materials, and I really was worried about it. But then when I started to that content, and then second, connecting with the decision maker themselves. Do you an analyst or decision maker just seems better? What's the approach to do that?
As you can tell from some more smart and to define startups and venture, but on this topic in particular, I don't support capital approach to confidentiality. I think I never shared that. I think it's the absolute worst thing to do. People talk all the time, that's fine, but sending materials is hard. And there is now pretty easy to control that, and nobody's going to think it's so it's totally fine. Add passwords to do the thing in DocSend that is mildly irritating, completely reasonable, or it's just send you the email and then you have to open it up from there. I think it's totally fine to take that posture. And if anything, it's broadly reflective of business that is at a scale that equal decision maker stuff. There is a small percentage of non-decision makers at firms that are really smart and high integrity.
I should get a couple of what to say, but I'm glad that you actually said that. I think you find ways. One of the ways which I challenge all my VC coaching clients that are not partners is, looking at your firm's website, why would anyone ever want to talk to you? Because clearly you're not the person to choose at this firm. And I think it is really about some of their expertise, right? So if you're they let go to market some company that is a close correlate for them, I think their expertise is really valuable to you and will probably help you in that firm, right? But if they are just a powerless mini version of the GP you actually want to pitch, then they're not going to get used. Yeah.
I think that the goal is always confidentiality, but the reality is that if your competitor wants to get the information enough, they probably will get their names on it some now through an investor update or someone makes a picture of the debt. So just be prepared that if there's something really, really sensitive, just do it over a call where it can be screenshotted. It's easier to protect in conversations than it is in documents.
But that applies to like contracts with like large companies that you have an NDA with, like that sort of things. Be aware that there are a lot of things that are not actually confidential. It comes off as a bit like newbie-ish if you treat like your business plan like it's irreparable. You have to have like the line.
Yeah, one. How do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I would defer to some of the like, protectability and then, all of that sort of stuff. But I don't necessarily need to see that it happened and evaluate it happened to decide whether or not I want to invest, right? There's an actual like due diligence practice that for example, you submit a term sheet. My assumption is because I know who will see that it was a granted patent or anything else like that, then like that has some value. It's probably not the only reason why I'm investing. But if it's a major part of the deal, that's going to be part of the due diligence process. So in a due diligence process that kicks off like a deeper one, that's like post term sheet or something like that. A term sheet is effectively where you can write in for confidentiality, like agreeing to explore this deal. And there's a no shot on your side and all of this sort of stuff. So that's more of an SL. So if you don't want to like give away the details of a patent, but like you can at least tell me that one exists, that can be reserved for a different part of the due diligence.
Just keep it out.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that. Cool. All right. A full day. It was aimed to end at 3:40 and it's still 54. So 14 minutes off is really not bad for, I think everyone here anticipated deserving around. To linger for a little bit, but not until 6 o'clock. I'm sorry to